Welcome to Ghostlore Chronicles Ghost. In today's video, we bring you a massive collection of terrifying stories, hours of spine-chilling horror that will drag you deep into the darkness. Each tale is filled with mystery, fear, and dread. Experiences that will make you question the thin line between reality and nightmare. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. I don't usually talk about this story, not because I've forgotten it, but because every time I try, I feel that same cold wind brush against my skin, like the one that hit me that night. Chicago is a city of noise, movement, and lights, but sometimes, beneath all the hustle, it hides things better left forgotten. I was a trucker back then, making regular runs through the city. Route schedules, long nights, and rest stops became my whole life. Nothing unusual, until I started hearing whispers about something people called the phantom train. First I laughed. Ghost stories, right? Every city's got 'em. But this one clung to me. The story goes that deep in the south side of Chicago, along a stretch of abandoned rail lines, people had seen a train. Not just any train, but a monstrous iron beast that came screaming out of nowhere. Headlights blazing, wheels screeching, smoke pouring into the night sky, and just when you thought it would crash into you, it vanished. No tracks shaking, no sound, nothing, just silence. Most folks brushed it off as urban legend. Some said it was just kids making things up, or the wind howling through the rusted steel bridges. But truckers? We hear things normal folks don't. Out on the road at 2 a.m., with only the CB radio and the hum of the tires to keep you company, you start to notice patterns. The same stretch of road where radios go dead. The same crossing lights that blink for no reason, even when the tracks are buried under weeds. That's where my story begins. It was a freezing November night. My route had me hauling cargo past the old industrial district, a place most people avoid after dark. Rusted warehouses, cracked asphalt, and rows of decaying rail tracks that hadn't seen real trains in decades. I had the window cracked open, the sting of the cold air keeping me awake. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, a low metallic rumble, like thunder, but steady, rhythmic. My eyes flicked to the side mirror, expecting to see another semi gaining on me. But the highway was empty, not a single pair of headlights behind me. The rumble grew louder. I turned down the radio, gripping the wheel tighter. The sound wasn't coming from the road. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, like it was rising from beneath the ground itself. I slowed as I approached an old rail crossing. The wooden planks were broken, the steel rails coated with rust. No way in hell a train could still run there. And yet, the crossing lights started flashing. Red, red, red. The bells clanged, echoing across the empty street. My heart hammered in my chest. I slammed the brakes, bringing the truck to a stop just yards from the tracks. That's when I saw the fog. It rolled in from nowhere, thick and unnatural, spreading across the road like a living thing. My headlights cut through it, but the beams seemed to bend, swallowed by the mist. And then the sound hit. The deafening scream of a whistle. It was so loud, so sharp, it rattled my windows. My bones vibrated. I clamped my hands over my ears, wincing. The ground shook beneath me, trembling like an earthquake. And through the fog, two burning white lights appeared. Headlamps. A train was coming. But how? There hadn't been service on these tracks for years. The lights grew brighter. The rumble became a roar, the clatter of iron wheels on steel rails thundering through the night. I sat frozen in my seat, staring at the impossible. And then, just as the engine should have burst through the fog and into view, it vanished. The sound cut off instantly. No fade, no echo, just silence. The fog lingered, curling around the truck before thinning into nothing. The crossing lights went dark. The bells stopped. I sat there in the middle of the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath clouding the glass. The night was still again, dead still. If I had any sense, I would have put the truck in gear and gotten the hell out of there. But something inside me whispered to stay, to watch, to listen, because that, whatever that was, it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And Chicago's Phantom train had just noticed me. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I forced myself to keep driving, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I kept replaying what I saw, what I heard. The whistle that felt like it was tearing through my skull. The fog that moved like it had a mind of its own. The train that appeared and then disappeared. I told myself it was exhaustion. Hallucinations from too much caffeine and too many miles. But then, I heard another trucker talking about it. It was a week later at a greasy little diner just outside Joliet. Truck stop chatter is usually the same. Weather, traffic, dispatchers who don't know what the hell they're doing. But that night, I caught one word in a hushed conversation from the booth behind me. Train. I froze, listening. The guy speaking was an older driver, rough voice, probably had 1,000,000 miles under his belt. He leaned close to the other man across the booth and said, "Swear to God." It blew right through me. Headlights brighter than anything I've ever seen. Then gone. Nothing. My fork clattered against the plate. The man looked at me, narrowing his eyes like he knew I was eavesdropping. "You hear about it too?" he asked. I swallowed. "Maybe. Depends on what you're talking about." His lips curled into a grim smile. The Phantom train. Chicago. South Side. My stomach turned to ice. The other man in the booth shook his head. "Don't fill his ears with that crap, Rick. It's just stories." "Stories," Rick snapped. "Tell that to Tommy Keller." Kid swore he saw it at the 95th Street crossing. Next day, his truck's found abandoned. Door wide open. No sign of him. Just tracks in the dirt. Stopping right in the middle of the road. The diner suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the soda machine, the clink of dishes in the kitchen. "What happens to them?" I asked, my voice lower than a whisper. Rick's smile faded. He leaned closer, his breath reeking of stale coffee. "They don't come back." The words hung between us like a curse. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the other driver forced a laugh, trying to cut the tension. "Don't listen to him, kid. Old tracks, old stories. That's all it is. Rust and wind." But I'd seen it. I'd heard it. And deep down, I knew Rick was right. That night, parked in my sleeper cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. Every gust of wind against the trailer made me flinch. Every distant horn made my skin crawl. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of fog. Endless fog swallowing the streets of Chicago. And through it, 2 blazing headlights bore down on me. Closer, closer, until they filled my vision. I woke up gasping. The whistle was still ringing in my ears. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and spread the fear by sharing with your friends. And for more true, bone-chilling horror, make sure to subscribe to Ghostlore Chronicles. I couldn't ignore it anymore. By now, the stories weren't just whispers, they were warnings. Every trucker I talked to had a version of it. Some had seen it. Some had heard it. A few never returned from the tracks they swore they'd seen it on. And me? I had no choice but to find out for myself what the hell was going on. The next evening, I took a detour on my route. I parked the rig a few blocks away from the old industrial district, the same stretch where I first saw the train. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped out into the bitter November wind. The streets were empty, abandoned warehouses lining either side, their broken windows like empty eyes staring down at me. I approached the rail line slowly. Rusted steel rails jutted out of cracked asphalt, weeds choking the gaps between the ties. A faint layer of fog clung to the ground, just like the night I saw it. I held a flashlight in one hand and a CB radio in the other, though I didn't really expect anyone to answer. The air was still, too still. I followed the tracks, the crunch of gravel under my boots loud in the silent city. Then I saw it, marks, fresh marks, wheel imprints pressed into the dirt beside the rails. Not old, not rusted over, fresh, deep, as if something massive had run along them just hours ago. I froze. Could it be? My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe some construction vehicle, some maintenance crew. But the tracks didn't make sense. They started on one line, ran for a few hundred yards, and then disappeared. No continuation, no broken ties, nothing. Just dirt, undisturbed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I moved closer, shining the flashlight along the rails. That's when I heard it again, the low, metallic rumble. A vibration in the ground, subtle at first, then growing stronger, like a heartbeat beneath the city. I spun around, expecting to see headlights. Nothing. Then came the whistle, not a sound that faded into the night. No, this one cut through the silence, sharp and screaming. It made my chest hurt, like someone was twisting my ribcage from the inside. I stumbled backward. The tracks were empty. I couldn't see anything. The fog hadn't moved an inch, yet I could feel it pressing against me, dense and choking. And then I saw it, a shadow, not far from the tracks, just at the edge of my flashlight's beam. A figure, pale and thin, standing perfectly still. Couldn't see a face. It was too far, too hidden by the fog. But I could see the outline. A young woman, hair hanging in damp strands, clothes ragged and wet from the mist. "Hey!" I called, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond. And then, as if the air itself had swallowed her, she was gone. I blinked, shaking my head, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But then I noticed something on the ground where she had stood. A single, cracked photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. A young girl, no older than 20, smiling at the camera. Behind her, the same rail line stretched endlessly into fog, and scrawled in messy handwriting on the back, "I never left. Will you join me?" I dropped the photo, fluttered into the dirt. My stomach turned. I knew then this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. The phantom train wasn't just a story. And those who disappeared, they didn't leave. I knew I had to see it again. I couldn't stay away, no matter how terrified I was. Something inside me, call it curiosity, call it obsession, was pulling me back to those tracks. I told myself I'd just observe this time. No foolish heroics. No stepping into the fog. That night, I parked a little farther down the road, hidden in the shadows of a crumbling warehouse. I kept the engine running for warmth, the CB radio buzzing faintly with other drivers chatting far away. The city felt dead. Too dead. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your heart pound in rhythm with the wind. Hours passed, and then I heard it, the faint rumble like iron dragging over steel. My pulse quickened. The hairs on my arms stood straight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab, my boots crunching against the gravel. Through the mist, I saw the faint outline of the rails. And then, impossibly, the lights appeared. Two blazing headlights cutting through the fog, growing brighter, louder, closer. The metallic roar that followed shook the ground beneath me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet refused to move. The train appeared fully this time. Not old, not modern. Something timeless, like a nightmare stitched from steel and smoke. The cars behind the engine stretched endlessly into the fog, disappearing from sight. The wheels screeched, a sound that clawed at my sanity. Every instinct told me to flee, but I was frozen, watching it glide along tracks that seemed impossibly solid yet strangely ethereal. I reached for my CB radio. "Mayday, mayday," I shouted. "Phantom train, tracks at Southside." Nothing but static answered. The radio went dead, the hiss and crackle fading into the night. The fog pressed closer, curling around the train as though it were alive. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the train vanished. Not a slow fade, not a quiet retreat. It was gone, leaving behind only the lingering echo of its whistle and the scent of burnt iron. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the gravel. My flashlight rolled, spinning a beam across the rails that now looked abandoned, empty, harmless. I tried to make sense of it. I must have imagined it, right? No, the photograph, the shadow, the tracks, they were real. And now this, there was no denying it. Whatever was out here, it wasn't natural. It wasn't human. It was something else. something that didn't belong in the world I knew. I finally climbed back into the truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the glowing headlights following me. But when I blinked, nothing remained. Only the fog, curling over the abandoned tracks like a dark tide, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't close my eyes. Every time I did, the train was there again. Looming in the fog, its whistle cutting through the silence, calling me back to the tracks. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next day, I tried to convince myself I had overreacted. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even a trick of the fog and the city lights. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen something no one should see, and it wasn't done with me yet. I started asking around, cautiously. At truck stops, diners, and gas stations, I dropped hints, listening to the reactions of the regulars. Most gave me a tight-lipped smile, shrugged, or changed the subject. A few whispered warnings, eyes darting nervously toward the highway. And then there were those like Rick, who looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's real. Stay off those tracks if you value your soul." Curiosity battled fear in me. I had to know more. I needed to understand. So that night, I returned. I parked near the same abandoned rail crossing, flashlight and CB in hand, my camera tucked in my jacket. If this was real, I wanted proof. If it wasn't, I needed closure. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the empty warehouses, and the city seemed to hold its breath. My eyes scanned every inch of the fog-laden street, every shadowed corner, every cracked plank of the rail crossing. And then I heard it again. A low, metallic rumble, soft at first, then growing steadily louder. My heart pounded in my chest. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stepped closer to the tracks, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. And then I saw movement, a flicker of shadow in the fog, just beyond the reach of the light. A figure, tall and thin, almost transparent, gliding along the rails. My breath caught. It wasn't moving like a person. It moved like a phantom, smooth, fluid, impossible. The whistle blew again, piercing, echoing, calling. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to flee, but my body rooted to the spot. And then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. The train itself, materializing out of the mist. Headlights blazing, smoke curling, wheels grinding the air like knives against bone. The phantom engine glided along rails that should have been unusable for decades, leaving behind the smell of burning iron and something else, something ancient and wrong. It passed before I could fully comprehend it, stretching endlessly into the fog behind it. The rails shook under its weight, even though I knew they were long abandoned. The sound of its whistle lingered, burning in my ears, and then, just like that, it vanished. No smoke, no steam, no trace. Only silence, and the faint scent of iron that lingered in the cold night air. I collapsed against the cab of my truck, shaking, my breath ragged. Proof. I had proof that the stories were true. But at what cost? The phantom train was real, and somehow it knew I was watching. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even during my runs. Every dark stretch of road, every abandoned rail line made my stomach twist. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more the pieces refused to fit. The train, the shadowy figure, the photograph, it all pointed to something beyond comprehension. A few days later, I decided to do what I should have done from the start. I started digging into old records, newspapers, police reports, even library archives. What I found was chilling. Over the past 50 years, dozens of disappearances had been reported near the old South Side rail lines. Young men and women, truckers, pedestrians, some never seen again. In almost every case, witnesses reported strange lights, fog, and the unmistakable sound of a train whistle just before the disappearance. And some even mentioned seeing a figure standing on the tracks, pale and unmoving, staring at them. It was like the phantom train had been there for decades, claiming anyone who wandered too close. And the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't random. Patterns emerged. Certain nights, certain foggy conditions, certain crossings, the train appeared. The victims were almost always alone, isolated, caught unaware. It was hunting in its own inhuman way. I started documenting everything. My notes, sketches, photographs of the tracks, and the places the fog seemed to form unnaturally. The more I documented, the more I understood that the train wasn't just a ghost story, it was a predator. And somehow I had drawn its attention. One evening, I returned to the tracks, my nerves frayed, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I had to see it again, not for curiosity but to understand, to survive. The fog rolled in as if anticipating my arrival, curling around the rails like a living thing. The air grew heavy, and then I heard it, the metallic rumble, the low vibration in the ground. The whistle blew, sharp and deafening, echoing through the empty streets. And for the first time I saw it fully. The phantom train emerged from the fog, its headlights blazing, smoke curling into the night, wheels grinding the air. The figure appeared again, standing at the edge of the tracks, pale and unmoving, watching me. My heart hammered. The train's engine groaned like it was alive, and I realized I was not just witnessing it. I was part of its hunt. I stumbled back, falling to my knees. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog behind it. And then, as always, it vanished. The whistle echoed once more before silence swallowed the night. That night I didn't sleep. I could still hear the echo of the whistle, feel the vibration of the rails beneath my feet. The phantom train was real, and now it was aware of me. The fear didn't leave me the next day. I drove through Chicago with my eyes constantly scanning every shadow, every abandoned alley, every broken window. Every time I passed the South Side Industrial District, I felt it watching me, waiting for me to slow down, to get too close. I decided I couldn't face this alone. I reached out to Rick, the trucker from the diner. He answered after a long pause, his voice low and cautious. "I told you to stay off those tracks," he said. "If you're serious about this, meet me tonight at the old freight yard. Don't come alone." I agreed, adrenaline and fear making my hands shake as I hung up. That night, I parked my truck a few blocks away and walked toward the freight yard. The city was quieter than usual, the wind carrying a hollow whistle-like sound that made my skin crawl. Rusted containers lined the yard, shadows forming and breaking in the flickering light from the street lamps. Rick was already there, leaning against the wall of an abandoned warehouse. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered, but there was a note of grim understanding in his voice. "I've been following it for years. Others have tried to document it. Some disappear, some go mad. The train, it's not human, and it feeds on attention." I shivered. "I need to see it. I need to know." Rick shook his head. "Then you'll see more than you bargained for." He motioned for me to follow him toward the tracks. The fog was thicker here, curling along the rails like a living snake. The metallic rumble started faintly, deep beneath the ground, growing louder with every step. The whistle cut through the air, sharper than anything I'd ever heard, and I realized I could feel the sound in my bones. Suddenly, the phantom train emerged from the mist, headlights blinding, smoke rising in thick plumes, wheels grinding the rails that shouldn't even be usable. Behind it, the shadowy figure appeared again, pale and staring. My heart hammered. I could see every detail now, the ironwork of the engine, the twisted, endless cars, and the way the fog seemed to cling to it like a living thing. Rick whispered, "Don't stare too long. It notices when you do." I tried to look away, but my eyes were glued. The train moved with impossible speed, yet it didn't crash or derail. The sound of the whistle burned in my ears, the vibration underfoot like a warning. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Not a slow fade, not a disappearing wisp, just gone, leaving only the eerie silence and the faint iron smell of something unnatural. I sank to the ground, trembling. Rick crouched beside me. "It knows you now, and it will come back." He didn't say more, but the weight of his words settled over me like a shadow. The phantom train wasn't done with me. and I had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker story. The following nights were worse. Sleep became impossible. Every stretch of road, every foggy intersection, every abandoned crossing made my stomach tighten. Even in the daytime, I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond sight, waiting for the next opportunity. I started taking notes, documenting every detail. The times it appeared, the weather conditions, the locations. Patterns emerged. Fog, wind direction, even the temperature seemed to matter. I realized this thing wasn't random, it was intelligent. Studied, it waited, it chose. One night, I parked near a section of track I hadn't dared approach before. The wind was sharp, carrying whispers that sounded like faint laughter. My flashlight barely cut through the dense fog. I could feel the vibration of the rails long before I saw anything. Then the whistle blew, sharper, louder, closer. The phantom train materialized, more massive than ever. The engine gleamed wet and black under the dim streetlights, smoke curling in unnatural spirals. Its wheels didn't just grind, they tore the night itself. And there, standing motionless at the edge of the rails, was the figure. The young woman from the photograph, pale, wet hair plastered to her face, staring with hollow eyes. I realized I wasn't just witnessing the train. I was part of it now. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, but my legs refused. The whistle pierced deeper, and the fog seemed to coil around me, whispering in voices I almost understood. It was calling me, tempting me closer, promising answers, but at a price I wasn't willing to pay. The train passed, stretching endlessly, disappearing into the mist. The figure lingered for a heartbeat longer, then vanished as well, leaving only the iron scent in the cold night air. My hands shook, and I felt a pull I couldn't resist, a connection forming between me and the phantom train. I had entered its world, and it had marked me. From that night on, I understood one horrifying truth. This wasn't a legend. It wasn't a story. The phantom train was real, it was aware, and I had become part of its narrative. Every mile I drove, every city I passed, I could feel its gaze, following, waiting, patient. And I knew sooner or later it would come for me again. I began noticing changes in myself. The more I thought about the phantom train, the more it seemed to seep into my thoughts, my dreams, my very existence. Even when I tried to distract myself with work, traffic, or mundane routes, a shadow lingered in the corners of my mind. I would catch glimpses of it in reflections, headlights appearing in store windows, fog forming unnaturally in alleys. Even the hum of my truck seemed to echo its metallic roar. Rick warned me once more. Once it chooses you, it watches. It waits. You think you're alone on these roads, but it knows your every turn. It's patient, eternally patient. I laughed it off at first, but deep down, I knew he was right. One evening, I parked at a rest stop several miles from the usual tracks. Alone, I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was imagining things. That's when the CB crackled. Static first, then a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Don't look behind you." I froze. The rest stop was empty, lights flickering weakly. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The fog began to roll in from nowhere, thick and suffocating. My chest tightened as a metallic rumble vibrated through the ground, subtle at first, then intensifying, shaking my truck as if warning me. I dared to glance behind me. Two headlights appeared in the mist, growing larger, closer. The train, the phantom train, alive and impossible, cutting through the fog, moving along tracks that should not exist, wheels grinding the air like knives. My breath caught in my throat. The whistle screamed, sharper and closer than ever, vibrating my bones and making my head ache. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. No smoke, no noise, nothing. Only the lingering iron scent in the cold night air. I leaned back in my seat, trembling. Rick was right. It watches. And now it had marked me. I was no longer just a witness. I was part of its world, caught in its endless, dark cycle. And I knew one terrifying fact. it would return. Days passed, but the sense of being watched never left. Every time I parked my rig, every time I stepped out for a stretch, I felt eyes on me. Even when the lot was empty, I could sense it in the fog, in the silence between passing cars, in the way shadows lingered a moment too long. The phantom train wasn't just an urban legend anymore. It was a presence, predator, and I was its latest obsession. I began carrying my camera everywhere, trying to capture something, anything, that could prove it existed. But no photograph ever showed the train clearly. Just fog, shadows, and sometimes faint outlines of headlights that weren't there when I looked through the viewfinder. It was as if the train knew how to evade human perception, materializing fully only when I couldn't record it. I reached out to Rick again, desperate for guidance. "You need to stay off the tracks for a while," he said, voice grim. "It feeds on fear, attention, curiosity. The more you try to understand, the more it focuses on you. Some people vanish trying to prove it exists. Some worse. The word echoed in my mind. I didn't need an explanation. I had already felt it. Every time I slept, the fog crept into my dreams, the whistle screaming through my thoughts. Every time I drove alone at night, I felt the vibration beneath the asphalt, the faint hum that preceded its appearance. It was teaching me something I didn't want to learn. Then one night, the inevitable happened. I was driving a quiet route through the Southside Industrial District when the fog rolled in faster than I had ever seen. My headlights barely penetrated it, and then I heard the rumble. Low at first, then growing, surrounding the truck, vibrating the metal, shaking my bones. I froze. The road behind me, in front of me, everywhere. The sound was coming from everywhere. And then I saw it. Headlights in the mist, growing brighter, closer. The phantom train, full and impossibly large, moving along tracks that should not exist. Its whistle pierced the night, louder than any sound I had ever heard, vibrating my chest and throat. The figure appeared again, standing pale and silent at the edge of the rails, watching, waiting. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, my hands shaking. The train passed, endlessly long, smoke curling in unnatural spirals. And then, as always, it vanished, leaving only the echo of its whistle, the smell of iron, and the undeniable knowledge that I had been marked. From that night on, I understood the cruel truth. I was not just witnessing the phantom train anymore. I was part of its world, and sooner or later, it would call me back. I started noticing things I couldn't explain. At truck stops, people would glance at me strangely, whispering in hushed tones. Some older drivers avoided my eyes altogether, like they recognized something about me that they dared not speak aloud. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched, hunted, never left. One evening, I parked near the old Southside rail lines, desperate to see it again. The fog rolled in like a living thing, curling around the abandoned tracks. I gripped my flashlight, my camera, my CB radio, everything trembling in my hands. The air itself felt charged, heavy, waiting. And then I heard it, the whistle. Sharp, screaming, cutting through the silence like a blade. The vibration ran through my feet, my chest, my bones. My breath caught. Headlights pierced the fog, growing brighter, larger, closer. The phantom train emerged, more terrifying than ever, massive and impossible, moving along tracks that shouldn't exist, smoke curling unnaturally, wheels grinding the air. The figure appeared again, pale and unmoving, staring at me with hollow eyes. I realized, with a sinking chill, that it wasn't just the train anymore. The figure was part of it, a sentinel guiding it, marking those who dared to watch. My heart hammered. The whistle screamed again, louder, deeper, vibrating my chest and mind. Then it passed, endless cars stretching into the fog behind the engine. And then, as always, it vanished. No fade, no retreat, just silence, the smell of iron lingering, the cold pressing against me. I sank to my knees, trembling, realizing that the phantom train wasn't just real. It was aware, and I was now part of its narrative. Rick's words echoed in my mind. It feeds on attention, on curiosity. You can't escape it once it notices. I had noticed, and it had noticed me. After that night, I couldn't keep driving without constantly glancing over my shoulder. Every dark stretch of road, every abandoned crossing, every foggy intersection reminded me of the phantom train. Its presence had seeped into every corner of my life. The sound of metal against metal, even in my imagination, made my stomach churn. I knew it was out there, waiting, patient and eternal. I started taking extreme precautions. I avoided the usual south side routes, drove only in daylight, and stayed in well-lit truck stops. But no matter what I did, the feeling never left. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in unexpectedly or when the wind carried a faint metallic echo, I could swear I felt it nearby, watching, judging, waiting. Desperate for answers, I began researching every disappearance tied to the old rail lines. Newspaper articles, missing persons reports, library archives. I pored over decades of records. Patterns emerged. Foggy nights, isolated crossings, unexplained lights, witnesses describing strange shadows. And in nearly every case, those who disappeared were alone. Not a single person who saw it and survived had tried to warn others in detail, and some had vanished entirely soon after. The deeper I dug, the more I understood. The phantom train wasn't just a ghost story or an urban legend. It was intelligent, methodical. It hunted and it chose carefully. And somehow I had drawn its attention. Every attempt to observe, every attempt to document it only increased my risk. One evening, unable to resist any longer, I returned to the tracks. The fog was thick, curling like fingers around the rails. My flashlight cut feebly through it. I could hear the rumble in the ground before I saw anything, growing louder and sharper. Then, the whistle screamed, splitting the silence. Headlights appeared, the phantom train fully materializing from the mist. Smoke twisted unnaturally around the engine, wheels grinding the air with impossible force. And there, at the edge of the tracks, the figure, the pale, unmoving sentinel, watched me once again. I realized then, with a chill I couldn't shake, that I had become part of its world. Not a witness, not an observer, but a marked participant in a story that had been playing out for decades. The phantom train was real, it was aware, and it would return. I just didn't know when. The weeks that followed were unbearable. Every time I drove alone at night, every time fog rolled in unexpectedly, every time I heard the faint hum of metal on steel, my heart would pound in anticipation. I was never truly alone. The phantom train was always there, waiting, unseen but undeniably present. I tried to tell people, but the disbelief in their eyes made me regret it almost immediately. Friends, coworkers, even other truckers, they all laughed it off as stress, fatigue, imagination. Some didn't even want to hear it. They avoided me after I mentioned the sightings, like acknowledging it might somehow invite it closer. I learned quickly, people fear what they can't understand. And the phantom train was beyond understanding. One night, I drove a less traveled route, trying to distract myself, trying to ignore the tracks that had become etched in my mind. The city lights faded behind me, leaving only the cold. The obsession grew. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I closed my eyes, the fog rolled in. Every time I tried to distract myself, the whistle echoed in my mind. I became a prisoner of my own memories, and of the phantom train's relentless presence. Rick tried to warn me one last time. "You can't fight it," he said, voice tight with fear. "Once it notices you, it watches. Every mile you drive, every stop you make, it knows. You can't escape. You just survive. And hope. Hope. I had none. I had already seen too much, felt too much, and learned the patterns. The train hunted not out of malice, but because that was its nature. It was inevitable, patient, unyielding. One fog-choked night, I returned to the tracks, not to observe this time, but to face it. I parked my rig carefully, flashlight and camera ready, hands trembling. The fog moved like a living thing, curling around the rails and the empty industrial buildings. And then I heard it. The rumble, deep and metallic, growing louder with every second. The The whistle cut through the silence, shrill, piercing, impossible. And there it was, the phantom train, massive, impossible, wheels grinding the air, smoke curling in unnatural spirals. The figure was there too, pale, silent, staring at me with hollow eyes. I felt the pull again, the magnetic draw toward the rails, the inevitable attraction that I could not resist. I was marked, hunted, entwined in a story that had been playing out for decades. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog behind the engine. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished. The echo of the whistle lingered. The iron scent of its presence clung to the air, and I knew this was not the end. It would return always, and I would never be the same. From that night on, every mile I drove, every city I passed, every dark stretch of road, I could feel it following me. The phantom train was real. It was eternal. And I had been claimed. After that night, my life became a careful balance between routine and avoidance. I took the long, well-lit routes, stopped at busy truck stops, and tried to blend into the ordinary hum of the highways. But the knowledge of what lurked in the fog, waiting along the abandoned tracks, never left me. I was always alert, always listening for the distant rumble or the sharp scream of the whistle that had become burned into my memory. Even during the day, when the city was noisy and crowded, I felt its presence. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't, fog formed in strange pockets even under the sun, and my camera captured fleeting anomalies. Blurred outlines, faint lights, shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. It was as if the phantom train's existence had bled into reality itself, bending it around me. I tried talking to Rick again, hoping for guidance, for reassurance. "It's not something you can fight," he said. His voice was grim, tired. "It's patient, intelligent, aware. It hunts in its own way, and once it notices you, you're part of its cycle. You're marked." I didn't want to believe him, but I couldn't deny the evidence of my senses, the unshakable terror that came with remembering each encounter. Every night, when I parked my truck or tried to rest, the fog crept into my dreams, curling around me. The whistle echoed through my mind as if the train itself was whispering to me, reminding me that it knew where I was and that I could never truly escape. And yet, I felt compelled to understand it, to see it again. The obsession was dangerous, but it was stronger than my fear. I knew that returning to the tracks would be a risk, but it was one I felt I had to take. I had become part of its story, and deep down, I knew the phantom train was waiting, always patient, always eternal, ready for the next chapter in the cycle it had begun so long ago. The days grew longer, but the nights never ended. Sleep became a tenuous illusion. Even in the daylight, I felt the presence of the phantom train, lurking beyond perception, shaping my every movement. My hands shook whenever I drove near old rail lines, even if they were well outside the Southside Industrial District. It didn't matter where I went, the awareness was constant. I was being watched. I started carrying multiple cameras, tape recorders, and even small sensors I'd read about online that could detect vibration or electromagnetic disturbances. I became obsessed with capturing proof. Anything. If I could document its existence, maybe I could understand it, or at least warn others. But every time I reviewed the footage, the images were indecipherable. Headlights blurred into the fog. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Sometimes, I thought I saw the figure from the photograph standing at the edge of the rails, only to vanish when I blinked. Rick's words echoed constantly. It feeds on curiosity. The more you chase it, the more it watches. Couldn't stop. The compulsion had grown too strong. I had seen the train, heard the whistle, smelled the iron, felt the vibration of its wheels. And I couldn't leave it alone. One night, I returned to the tracks once again. The fog rolled thick and cold, wrapping around me like icy fingers. The metallic rumble began, low at first, building slowly, vibrating the ground beneath my boots. Then the whistle screamed, sharper than I had ever heard, cutting through the silence and rattling my teeth. Headlights pierced the mist. The phantom train materialized, massive, impossible, grinding along tracks that shouldn't exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally into the sky. The figure appeared again, pale and unmoving, its hollow eyes fixed on me. I realized that I wasn't just observing it. I was part of its hunt. It knew I was here. It had been watching, waiting, and now it was coming for me. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, as the train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog. Then, as always, it vanished, leaving only the echo of the whistle and the lingering iron scent. I was shaken, aware of something I couldn't describe, something that went beyond fear. I had crossed a threshold. The phantom train wasn't just a story. It was a force, eternal and patient, and I had become part of its world. By now, my obsession had become a curse. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of fog sent my heart racing. The city streets, once familiar and mundane, now felt alien, charged with hidden danger. The whistle haunted my waking hours, the metallic rumble resonating through my chest as if reminding me that the phantom train was always near, always waiting. I began to avoid social contact. Friends, family, co-workers, they all noticed my growing paranoia and the haunted look in my eyes. But how could I explain it? How could anyone believe in a train that didn't exist, yet had stalked me through the night, appearing and disappearing like a nightmare? Even Rick had begun to avoid calling me frequently, leaving only cryptic warnings whenever we spoke. One foggy night, I forced myself back to the tracks. I parked the rig at a safe distance and watched. The mist curled around the rusted rails, seeming to pulse with life. The faint hum beneath the asphalt reached my ears. The whistle cut through the night, piercing and insistent. My pulse thundered as headlights emerged from the fog. The phantom train was here. I could see the engine clearly this time. Massive, dark, unyielding, with smoke twisting unnaturally into the sky. The figure stood at the edge of the tracks, pale, silent, staring at me with hollow eyes. I realized with terror that the train didn't just move on the rails. It moved through perception, through fear, through attention. It was intelligent, patient, and relentless. As it passed, endlessly stretching into the fog, I felt a pull, an almost magnetic draw, beckoning me toward the rails, toward the unknown. Then, just as abruptly, it vanished. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. The iron scent lingered. The echo of the whistle haunted my ears. And I knew the phantom train had claimed a part of me, and it would follow me, always waiting for the moment I faltered. I sat in the cab of my truck, trembling, unable to process what I had witnessed. The city continued around me, oblivious to the horror lurking in its shadows. I had become part of the story, entwined with the phantom train, and there was no turning back. After that encounter, I realized my life had irrevocably changed. The foggy streets, the deserted rail crossings, even the distant hum of machinery, everything reminded me of it. Every night, as I parked my rig at a lonely rest stop or fueled up at a quiet station, I felt the presence of the phantom train, waiting just out of sight, patient and eternal. Sleep became a fragile illusion. The whistle haunted my dreams, echoing through tunnels of fog and steel, and the figure from the photograph would appear at the edge of the rails, staring, silent, and hollow-eyed. Even during the day, shadows seemed to linger unnaturally. Fog appeared in odd patches, and faint metallic vibrations resonated beneath the asphalt, as if marking my path for the next encounter. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, taking long-haul routes that avoided old tracks, sticking to well-lit highways and busy truck stops. But the train's influence was inescapable. I could feel it following me, its awareness stretching into my very thoughts. Every mile I drove, every city I passed, every intersection I crossed, its presence was there, patient, watching, waiting. One night, I found myself drawn back to the south side tracks, despite knowing the danger. The fog rolled in like living fingers, curling around the rails and abandoned warehouses. The metallic rumble beneath my feet grew steadily louder, vibrating through my truck, through my bones. The whistle pierced the night, sharper and louder than ever, cutting through the fog and into my very soul. Headlights blazed through the mist. The phantom train emerged, massive and impossible, moving along tracks that defied logic. Smoke twisted unnaturally, curling into the sky like dark serpents. The figure appeared again, pale and silent, watching me with hollow eyes. I realized I was no longer just a witness. I was part of its hunt. It had marked me, drawn me into its endless cycle, and there was no escaping it. The train passed, stretching endlessly, then vanished, leaving only the echo of the whistle and the lingering iron scent. I was shaken, haunted, and aware of a truth I could not deny. I had become part of the phantom train's world, and it would never let me go. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more impossible it became. Friends and fellow drivers dismissed my warnings as paranoia, exhaustion, or hallucinations. But I knew what I had seen. The fog, the whistle, the figure, the impossibly long train moving along tracks that shouldn't exist. And now it had claimed me in a way that no one else could see or understand. Every route I took, every highway I drove, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Even in the city's bright daylight, I would catch fleeting glimpses of headlights reflected in store windows, or shadows that moved against the fog, always at the edge of perception. It was relentless, eternal, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I started documenting obsessively. Photographs, sketches, notes, audio recordings. The cameras never captured it fully, but anomalies appeared. Blurred shapes, strange lights, and faint outlines that weren't there before. The more I recorded, the more I realized it didn't want to be understood. It wanted to be observed, to mark me, to draw me into its cycle. Rick's warning echoed constantly. It feeds on attention. The more you chase it, the more it focuses on you. Some people disappear trying to prove it exists. Some worse. I understood now. I had been chosen, marked, and there was no escaping it. One night, unable to resist, I returned to the old industrial tracks. The fog was thick, swirling like a living entity. The metallic rumble began faintly beneath the asphalt, growing louder, vibrating through my chest. The whistle cut through the silence, screaming, deafening. Headlights appeared, the phantom train materializing fully from the mist. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale and silent, watching. I was frozen, knowing that this time it had come specifically for me. Passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, then vanished. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, leaving only the echo of the whistle and the iron scent in the air. I understood then with absolute certainty. The phantom train was real, it was aware, and I had become part of its eternal hunt. The days that followed were a haze of fear and obsession. Every mile I drove, every city I passed, I felt its presence lingering just out of sight. The train wasn't bound by logic or geography. It could appear anywhere, whenever the fog and conditions were right. I learned to watch for the subtle signs. The sudden chill, the unnatural fog, the faint metallic vibration beneath the ground. They were all warnings. Sleep became a battleground. The whistle haunted my dreams, echoing through tunnels of fog and steel. The figure from the photograph would appear at the edge of the tracks, staring silently, hollow eyes fixed on me. I awoke in a sweat, heart pounding, feeling the pull toward the tracks even in my waking hours. I tried to research, to find patterns, to understand the creature I was now entwined with. Newspaper archives revealed decades of disappearances. Drivers, pedestrians, and curious wanderers all drawn to the tracks and never seen again. In almost every case, witnesses spoke of fog, strange lights, and the distant whistle before the vanishings. The phantom train was patient, methodical, eternal. Rick's voice returned to me over the CB one night. It waits for the curious, the brave, the foolish. You've already drawn its attention. Every attempt to understand only strengthens the bond. His warning rang in my ears as the sun set and the fog rolled in. And then, inevitably, it appeared. I had returned to the South Side tracks once again, drawn by the compulsion I could neither resist nor explain. The fog enveloped the rails like living smoke, The metallic rumble grew, vibrating the asphalt beneath my feet. The whistle screamed, cutting through the night, piercing my very bones. Headlights blazed through the mist. The phantom train, massive and impossibly real, moved along tracks that shouldn't exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally around the engine. The figure was there, pale and unmoving, watching me. I realized with absolute dread that I was no longer an observer. I was part of its story, part of its hunt, marked and unable to escape. The train passed, then vanished, leaving only silence, iron in the air, and the unshakable knowledge that it would return. After that night, I could no longer deny the truth. The phantom train wasn't just a legend, a story told by truckers or whispered in diners. It was real, and it had drawn me into its eternal cycle. Every mile I drove, every highway I traversed, I felt its gaze, patient and unyielding, following me through the fog, through the shadows, through the empty streets. I started noticing small signs everywhere. Fog that seemed to form unnaturally, metallic vibrations under my truck even on roads without tracks, fleeting reflections of headlights and glass that weren't there when I looked again. It was as if the phantom train had infiltrated reality itself, bending perception around me, leaving traces only I could perceive. I tried to distract myself, focusing on routes that avoided the south side, sticking to busy highways, staying in crowded rest areas. But the compulsion never left. Something inside me, a mix of fear, obsession, and morbid curiosity, drove me back toward the tracks to confront what I had become part of. One night, I returned. The fog rolled thick and heavy, curling around rusted rails and abandoned warehouses like living fingers. The metallic rumble began beneath my feet, subtle at first, then growing until it shook my chest and vibrated through the cab of my truck. The whistle blew, sharp and piercing, slicing through the still night like a blade. Headlights appeared in the mist. The phantom train emerged, massive and impossibly real, moving along tracks that shouldn't exist, grinding the air with wheels that defied physics. The figure was there again, pale and silent, watching me with hollow eyes. I understood then, with a shiver that ran from my toes to the top of my head, that I was no longer a mere observer. I had been marked, drawn into the hunt, and there was no escape. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, and then, as always, it vanished. Silence reclaimed the night, but the iron scent lingered, and with it, the chilling awareness. The phantom train was eternal, patient, and I was now inseparably a part of its world. By this point, my life had become a constant tension between motion and avoidance. Every night, every fog-laden stretch of road, every abandoned crossing reminded me that the phantom train was still out there, watching, waiting. The whistle haunted my thoughts, echoing in my dreams, blending into the hum of my engine, the rumble of tires on asphalt, until I could no longer separate reality from memory. I carried multiple cameras and sensors, hoping to catch proof, anything tangible, but the train eluded capture. Blurred lights, strange shadows, inexplicable metallic vibrations. These were all I could gather. The figure from the photograph appeared in fleeting glimpses at the edge of the tracks, always silent, always watching. I realized that it wasn't merely observing. It was marking, claiming, weaving me into its endless cycle. Rick's words haunted me. It feeds on attention. The more you try to understand, the stronger the bond. The train doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. His warnings resonated with every step I took, every mile I drove, every rest stop I abandoned. Yet, despite the fear, the obsession compelled me to return to the tracks. That night, the fog was thick, curling around the rusted rails like living smoke. The metallic rumble grew beneath the asphalt, vibrating through the cab, through my bones. The whistle shrieked, sharp and deafening, cutting through the silence. Headlights pierced the mist. The phantom train emerged, colossal, unreal, moving along impossible tracks. Smoke twisted unnaturally, wheels grinding the night itself. The figure was there, pale and silent, eyes hollow, fixed on me. I understood then that I had become part of its story. Not an observer, not a witness, marked, entangled, hunted. The train passed, endlessly stretching into the fog, and vanished. Silence returned, but the iron scent lingered, a reminder that I had crossed a threshold. The phantom train was eternal, patient, and it would always return for me. The obsession consumed me completely. Every mile I drove, every city I passed, every fog-laden road felt like a trap. The phantom train was no longer a distant terror. It was an ever-present force, following me in ways I could barely comprehend. Its whistle haunted my thoughts, echoing in the hum of my engine, in the distant echoes of the city, even in the quiet moments when I tried to rest. I tried to escape it, driving longer, busier routes, parking in crowded lots, sticking to highways lit by neon and streetlights. But the presence was unshakable. Shadows moved strangely in the corner of my vision. Fog appeared where it shouldn't. Metallic vibrations hummed beneath the asphalt, subtle but undeniable. It was as if the phantom train had woven itself into the fabric of reality itself, always aware of me, always patient. I returned to the tracks, despite knowing the danger. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, curling around the rails and abandoned warehouses like tendrils. The metallic rumble began beneath my feet, vibrating through the cab, through my chest. The whistle shrieked, deafening and sharp, slicing through the night air. Headlights pierced the mist. The phantom train materialized fully, massive and impossible, wheels grinding the air, smoke curling unnaturally. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale and silent, watching with hollow eyes. I was frozen, knowing that I was no longer an observer. I had been claimed, woven into its endless cycle, passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, then vanished. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, leaving only the iron scent lingering in the air. And I knew with certainty that this was not the end. The phantom train was eternal, patient, and I had become part of its world. Always it would wait, always it would return. The following days were a blur. I moved from city to city, highway to highway, but no distance could sever the invisible tether that now bound me to the phantom train. Even in the bright light of day, its presence lingered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, fog appeared where it shouldn't, and faint metallic vibrations seemed to follow my truck like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. I tried to distract myself with mundane tasks. Fueling stations, routine deliveries, conversations with other drivers, but the sense of being watched never faded. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whistle, felt the rumble, saw the figure standing silently at the edge of the rails. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a living part of my reality. Obsessed, I returned to documenting everything. Photographs, audio recordings, notes on locations and patterns. But every attempt to capture it failed. Blurred lights, strange shadows, fleeting outlines. The train always eluded proof, appearing only when it desired, as if aware of my attempts to understand it. Rick's words echoed constantly. It feeds on curiosity. The more you chase it, the more it focuses on you. One fog-choked night, I returned to the tracks. The fog was thick, curling like living smoke around rusted rails and abandoned buildings. The metallic rumble grew beneath the asphalt, vibrating through the cab, through my chest, through my very bones. The whistle shrieked, deafening and sharp. Headlights appeared in the mist. The phantom train emerged, massive, impossible, grinding along tracks that defied logic. Smoke twisted unnaturally, and the figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. I understood then, with a chill that froze my very soul. I was no longer a witness. I had been claimed, marked, woven into its eternal cycle. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, and vanished. Silence reclaimed the night, leaving only the lingering scent of iron and the unshakable certainty that it would return. And I would never be free to be why now. My life had become a tense balance between movement and vigilance. Every highway, every empty stretch of road, every foggy crossing reminded me of the phantom train. Its presence was constant, patient, and unyielding. The metallic rumble beneath the asphalt, the piercing whistle echoing through the night, and the figure standing silently at the edge of the tracks had imprinted themselves into my very being. I tried to keep a semblance of normalcy, longer routes, crowded truck stops, daytime driving, but the obsession never left. Shadows moved oddly in my peripheral vision. Fog formed in unnatural patches. Headlights appeared and disappeared in reflections that weren't mine. The train had seeped into reality itself, bending perception and marking me in ways I could not escape. Desperate for understanding, I returned to the tracks once again. The fog rolled thick, curling around rusted rails and abandoned warehouses like fingers reaching for me. The metallic rumble grew beneath my feet, vibrating through the cab, through my bones. The whistle screamed, cutting through the night with ear-splitting force. Headlights blazed through the mist. The phantom train appeared fully, massive and impossibly real, moving along tracks that should not exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally, wheels grinding the air with impossible force. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. I realized with chilling certainty that I was no longer an observer. I had been claimed, drawn into its cycle and marked for eternity. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, and then vanished. Silence reclaimed the night, leaving only the iron scent lingering in the cold air. I understood then with horrifying clarity. The phantom train was eternal, patient, and I was now inseparably part of its world. It would return, always, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The weeks that followed were unbearable. Every mile I drove, every city I passed, every abandoned stretch of road reminded me that the phantom train was out there, watching, waiting. Sleep became a rare commodity. Every night, the whistle haunted my dreams, echoing through tunnels of fog and steel. The figure from the photograph would appear at the edge of the rails, silent, pale and hollow-eyed, watching me as if measuring my fear. I became obsessed with documenting everything. Cameras, audio recorders, sensors, nothing captured the train fully, but anomalies appeared. Faint lights, blurred shadows, fleeting outlines. Every time I attempted to record it, I realized the train seemed aware, evading proof while still making its presence known. Rick's warning haunted me. It feeds on curiosity. The more you chase it, the more it focuses on you. Despite the danger, I returned to the tracks. The fog rolled in thick, curling around rusted rails and abandoned warehouses like a living thing. The metallic rumble began faintly beneath my feet, growing steadily louder, vibrating through my cab, through my bones. The whistle screamed, sharp and deafening, slicing through the silence of the night. Headlights pierced the mist. The phantom train emerged, massive and impossible, moving along tracks that defied reason. Smoke twisted unnaturally, and the figure stood at the edge of the rails, watching me silently. I knew then that I was no longer an observer. I had been claimed, drawn into its cycle, and marked. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, then vanished. Silence returned, but the iron scent lingered, a constant reminder that it would come back, always, and I would never be free. By now, fear had become a constant companion. Every fog-laden road, every deserted highway, every faint metallic hum beneath the asphalt reminded me of the phantom train. It had embedded itself into my perception, shaping my every decision, dictating my routes, controlling the rhythm of my life. Sleep was fragmented, haunted by the piercing whistle and the shadowy figure that appeared at the edge of the rails, silent and unyielding. I continued my obsessive documentation, cameras, sensors, audio recorders, but nothing captured it fully. Blurred shapes, fleeting lights, shadows that seemed to move on their own. The train seemed aware of my attempts to understand it, evading proof yet constantly asserting its presence. Rick's voice echoed in my memory. It feeds on attention. The more you chase it, the more it marks you. One night, I returned to the tracks, compelled beyond reason. The fog rolled thick and alive, curling around the rusted rails and abandoned buildings. The metallic rumble began beneath my feet, vibrating through my truck, through my chest, through my very bones. The whistle cut through the silence, shrill and deafening, commanding attention. Headlights emerged through the mist. The phantom train appeared fully, massive, impossible, grinding along tracks that should not exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally, curling into the sky like dark serpents. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, hollow-eyed, watching. I realized then with icy clarity that I was no longer a witness. I had been claimed, drawn into its eternal cycle and marked for life. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, and vanished. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, leaving only the lingering scent of iron. I understood with horrifying certainty that it would return, always, and I would forever be a part of its haunting story. The obsession had taken over completely. Every highway, every empty stretch of road, every foggy intersection became a trigger, reminding me that the phantom train was still out there, always waiting. Even in the daylight, when the streets were busy and crowded, I could sense its presence, lurking just beyond perception. Shadows moved unnaturally, fog formed in impossible patches, and metallic vibrations hummed beneath the asphalt, subtle but undeniable. I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life, long routes, crowded truck stops, daylight driving, but the train's influence was inescapable. It had embedded itself into my very being, shaping my decisions, controlling my fear, dictating my obsession. Rick's words haunted me constantly. It feeds on curiosity. The more you chase it, the more it claims you. One night, I found myself once again at the old South Side tracks. The fog rolled in thick, curling around rusted rails and abandoned warehouses like living smoke. The metallic rumble began beneath my feet, vibrating through the cab, through my chest, through my very bones. The whistle screamed, deafening and sharp, slicing through the night. Headlights blazed through the mist. The phantom train emerged, massive, impossible, grinding along tracks that defied logic. Smoke twisted unnaturally, and the figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, hollow-eyed, and silent. I realized then that I was no longer an observer. I had been claimed, drawn into its cycle, marked, and there was no escape. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, then vanished. Silence reclaimed the night, leaving only the lingering scent of iron and the inescapable truth. The phantom train was eternal, patient, and I was forever entwined in its world. Why now? My existence had become a delicate balance between movement and constant vigilance. Every foggy stretch, every abandoned crossing, every faint metallic vibration reminded me that the phantom train was out there, watching, waiting. Sleep was nearly impossible. Even in the brightest daylight, shadows seemed to linger unnaturally. Fog curled in impossible shapes, and the faint hum beneath the asphalt felt like a heartbeat I could never escape. I tried to stay occupied. Long hauls, busy highways, crowded truck stops, but the train's presence was relentless. My obsession grew, compelling me to return to the tracks again and again, to confront the force that had claimed a part of me. Rick's words replayed endlessly in my mind. It feeds on attention. The more you seek to understand it, the stronger its bond becomes. One night, the fog rolled in thick, enveloping rusted rails and abandoned warehouses like a living entity. The metallic rumble began beneath my feet, growing louder, vibrating through my truck, my chest, my bones. The whistle cut through the stillness, shrill and piercing, commanding my attention. Headlights blazed through the mist, and the phantom train materialized, colossal and impossible, grinding along tracks that shouldn't exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally, curling into the night sky. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. I understood then that I was no longer a mere observer. I had been drawn into its eternal cycle, marked, claimed. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, then vanished. Silence fell, but the iron scent lingered, an ever-present reminder that it would return, always, and that I was forever part of its haunting story. By the time I reached the last stretch of my route, I had come to accept the truth. The phantom train was no mere legend. It was real, eternal, patient, and it had claimed me. Every mile I drove, every darkened highway, every fog-laden crossing was a reminder of its relentless presence. Sleep remained elusive, the whistle echoing in my dreams and in the quiet hum of the engine, the figure always appearing at the edge of my vision, hollow-eyed and silent. I had tried to resist, to avoid, to rationalize, but the obsession had taken hold. Cameras, sensors, audio recordings, they could not capture its essence. The train appeared only when it chose, slipping in and out of perception like a predator stalking its prey. Rick's warnings haunted me constantly. It feeds on curiosity. You've already drawn its attention. There is no undoing it. One fog-choked night, I returned to the tracks once more, compelled by a force I could neither name nor resist. The fog rolled thick, curling around rusted rails and abandoned buildings like living smoke. The metallic rumble grew beneath my feet, vibrating through the cab, my chest, my very bones. The whistle shrieked, deafening, slicing through the night. Headlights blazed through the mist, and the phantom train emerged. Massive, impossible, grinding along tracks that shouldn't exist. Smoke twisted unnaturally, curling into the sky like dark serpents. The figure stood at the edge of the rails, pale, silent, hollow-eyed, watching me with unyielding intensity. I knew, with icy certainty, that I was no longer an observer. I had been claimed, marked, and woven into its eternal cycle. The train passed, stretching endlessly into the fog, and vanished. Silence fell, but the iron scent lingered, a permanent reminder that it would return. Always, and I would never escape. The phantom train had become my reality, and there was no end to its patient, eternal hunt.